I already made it very clear that I enjoyed the first State of Decay game. Its core gameplay loop of scavenging supplies, building your community, upgrading your base, and running over zombies with cars was very entertaining for a time, but there came a point when the gameplay started to get stale, and the less interesting aspects of the game, like the story and voice acting, made the option of pressing Alt F4 look very enticing. It's a premise that had a lot of potential, and I was intrigued to see how the sequel would take these ideas even further. That intrigue slowly turned into worry though, as I discovered that State of Decay 2 is seen as kind of a mixed bag by a lot of people online. I even had a few comments on my own State of Decay video talking about how the sequel wasn't as good as the first game. This made me contemplate on whether or not it was worth making a video on State of Decay 2. Should I carry on and go through with the video anyway, and possibly waste hours of my time? Or should I just talk about another beloved classic zombie game, like The Walking Dead Survival Instinct, or Escape Dead Island? No, I had to see for myself just what State of Decay 2 was like, and what I found was a really good zombie game, maybe even a great zombie game. State of Decay 2 not only builds on the good elements of the first game, but it also introduces so many more mechanics that make the overall experience more investing and challenging, and as a result the gameplay is more satisfying. Some of the issues from the first are still present in this one, and I can see why some people who enjoyed the first may not like the second, especially those fans who liked the story, because State of Decay 2's base game mode kind of bins off that feature, which I honestly didn't mind because the story was a bit of a snooze fest anyway. Having said that, the Heartland DLC did implement a narrative into the game, which I'll be sure to touch on, because I got flamed last time for not talking about Lifeline and Breakdown from the first game. For me though, State of Decay 2's biggest draw is the campaign mode, because it just scratches that itch of endless survival that the first game couldn't achieve without it getting dull and boring. A lot more importance is also put on the finer details in the game. Things such as personal skills and utilising facilities and outposts are key to sustaining you and your base. State of Decay 2 does a lot of the same the first one did. The mechanics are still intact, and the main goal of the game is to survive. Campaign is your bog standard sandbox type game mode. This is where those sandbox elements from the first game are rarely let loose. In this mode you will have to hunker down at a base, scavenge around the local areas for key resources and items, and build your community to eventually unlock new facilities and bigger bases, and repeat the cycle. Despite the first game allowing you to do this stuff, it still felt pretty restrictive with what it allowed you to do. Even though you could recruit people and had to find resources, the game held your hand a lot of the time, which made defeat almost impossible. But State of Decay 2 feels like the necessary steps were taken by Undead Labs to make situations in the game more dire and zombie encounters more deadly. When booting up a new game, you will be met with the difficulty selection screen, ranging from green all the way up to lethal. This determines the amount of supplies you find on the map, how many zombies there are at any one time, what kind of special infected you come across, and how much damage you will take. Picking anything other than Dread or above makes you a bitch, so I settled on Dread. This immediately sets a great example on what kind of freedom you are greeted with in this game. It lets you determine whether or not you want to be a Eugene or a Rick Grimes. Then you have to create your community of 3 characters, all of which have different skills, specialities, past lives, and personalities that will affect gameplay later down the line. I thought this was a great addition to the game, as that little bit extra freedom allows you to play the game the way you want, and lets you strategize what to look for in a character, and I chose this guy. Why? Because his name's Dick, obviously. Another great feature is that you are able to pick what map you want to play on, which all have slightly differing layouts, environments, and landmarks. The game gives you the option to play a tutorial, but that's boring, so you just spawn straight into the action, find a new house, and begin your new lives as zombie killers. The original State of Decay was fairly simple to grasp. If you were new to the game, it didn't take long for you to grow into it and understand the basics. The game is clear on what it wants you to do. Bar the story missions, the main goal is to keep your community stable, and you do that by building fortifications, establishing outposts, and recruiting survivors. But none of this felt necessary to progress and prosper. But it does feel like that's the case for the sequel, especially on the higher difficulties. Each survivor in your community feels like they have to serve a purpose. It's extremely beneficial to have survivors who have unique skills from one another, because specific upgrades are locked from your community if you don't have a survivor with that particular skill set. Another major change to your community is that you're able to select a leader. Survivors gain the ability to become a leader by earning influence points, which they do through the typical ways of killing zombies and helping out other survivor enclaves. Survivors can become one of 4 different leader variants, which is randomly determined by their personality. These 4 options are Sheriff, Trader, Builder, and Warlord. Sheriff and Warlord are the most beneficial, as Sheriff grants you the field hospital and Warlord grants you the armory, allowing you to make any kind of ammo you want, which in turn lets you shoot the piss out of anything you want, including other survivors. Your community members in the first game game weren't the brightest. They would often leave home to look for supplies, and then wind up in trouble, needing you to help them. It was stuff like this that made having a larger community more stressful than helpful. Features like this just distracted you from what made the game great, and thankfully Undead Labs toned it down. While survivors do go out scavenging, it tends to happen while you're out scavenging, and so you will get a notification saying a survivor has brought some loot back to the base. Personality amongst your group was also a major issue. Survivors were constantly getting pissed off with each other, so you'd have to take them outside to kill zombies. While survivors can still leave and even steal some of your shit, it's easy to keep your morale high enough to prevent this from happening. It's probably so easy to keep morale up because Lily isn't around to piss everyone off. Yeah, it's a good thing she's got.
If you're looking for a good place with good people, you should find your way to Trumbull Valley.
No, it can't be. Please just leave me alone, Lily. You've already taken enough. Another small but fun feature is being able to customize the outfits of your survivors, allowing you to make them look incredibly deadly or extremely goofy. You can even make them look like iconic video game characters. Undead Labs took some steps to make survivors feel different from one another. Players can only take the same shitty dialogue so many times before they throw themselves into a horde of zombies. So now survivors will just randomly talk about their backstories, and whoever was in charge of writing this dialogue needs counseling.
Remember those huge cakes that strippers jumped out of? I got one for my girlfriend's birthday once. The look on her face was priceless. First when it showed up, and then when the puppy climbed out of it.
The need for facilities means you will need a lot more materials to not only build them, but keep them functioning. While you can easily build simple facilities, a lot of the best upgrades and facilities come from a constant supply of power and water. Finding outposts that grant your base these fuel sources is very important. Finding materials in the first game was very easy, which meant your storage pools were always pretty healthy. But with State of Decay 2, it feels like you were always living on the poverty line, which is a good thing. That's why playing on lower difficulties is just pointless. A lot of the fun comes from the urgency to gather supplies and trying to get home without getting killed. So the fact that you need tons more supplies this time means you have to go outside way more often. This makes the whole cycle of gathering supplies and building up your base that much more rewarding, because you actually feel like you are working towards a goal, and every supply bag you find could make the difference. Actually putting your supplies in your base isn't a ball ache anymore either, as you can send all your loot to your storage and supply locker from outside your base. Finally, no longer do you have to keep running back from your car to your base like a complete dick. Smaller, more specific materials are also needed in order to craft items. It's not just your community that's had a massive overhaul either, as other enclaves act very differently to how they did in the first game. Well, that's a bit of a stretch. Most of them are still a pain in the ass, and you need to hold their hand a lot of the time.
Can you get me some food, please? Hey, we need fuel. Can you bring us some medicine because we're too lazy to do it ourselves?
But an interesting feature was the inclusion of hostile survivors. Whereas most enclaves are friendly and willing to trade, there are some edgy survivors who think the best way to survive a zombie apocalypse is to threaten everyone while living in a shitty little house. You can of course just take the law into your own hands and kill these hostile enclaves, and even execute them.
We now have more weapons and fewer.
Having more unique NPC interactions like hostile survivors and travelling traders makes the world so much more engaging and unique every time you play it. But trigger-happy survivors are obviously not the most interesting or dangerous enemies you come across. The infected are back, and more ferocious and numerous than before. In my State of Decay video, I didn't really go into detail about the freaks in the game, bar the feral, because the others, although posed a threat, were pretty easy to avoid because they weren't very numerous. However, thanks in part to the difficulty setting, these special infected are a lot more common and even more dangerous than before. Whereas in the past, screamers used to hide in infested buildings, now there's tons of them actively walking around the map, and even in hordes. And while it still doesn't directly attack you, its screams rally the troops within close proximity, which can turn your shit show into an even bigger shit show. It's best to deal with these guys first, and then take out any remaining zombies. Bloaters are still best just ignored altogether, as that thick cloud can cause you all sorts of problems, and the fact that they can just be lying in a field or in a crowd of zombies makes them even more dangerous. Shooting these guys from afar is your best bet. That seems to be a theme for a lot of the zombies anyway in this game, but with the juggernauts, you'll need an entire arsenal to take them down. These zombies are the resident bullet sponges and are the most annoying to kill. However, doing a takedown on one is pretty sick to see. Ferals are of course back, but for some reason they don't feel as lethal as they did in the first game. They go down pretty easily with a couple of bullets to the head. I'm sorry, Feral, you just don't do it for me anymore. Noise has lasting effects on your gameplay too. Zombies can't stand noise pollution, and the more noise you make in your base, the more zombies will congregate around your community, which makes leaving your base more dangerous. Every other zombie in the game is so much stronger, faster, and more dangerous, which is due to the next big catalyst for the gameplay, Blood Plague. Since the infection has been around for a while now, it's evolved, creating an even stronger strain than before, turning normal zombies and freaks into even deadlier versions of themselves. The inclusion of Blood Plague was one of the best changes Undead Labs brought to State of Decay 2, as it adds a whole new dynamic to how you have to fight and traverse around the map. Zombies carrying Blood Plague can be found around plague hearts, which are basically giant tumours. The number of plague hearts on a map at one time depends on the difficulty you are playing on, which is where most of the difficulty comes from. Plague hearts are essentially bases for zombies. They give off a vile red mist that prevents you from making an outpost out of any buildings within the mist, turning large areas of the map into dangerous zombie-controlled territories. Plague hearts will remain dormant until you attack them, at which point they will attract zombies to your location. If plague hearts are not immediately killed when awoken, they will send out infesting hordes to create infestations close to your base, with the goal of eventually finding your base. This makes the zombies in this game so much more terrifying than they were in State of Decay 1, as they are actively trying to find where you are, and seemingly being guided by plague hearts. Being attacked by a standard zombie is no big deal. Calm down mate, nothing a bandage can't fix. But getting attacked by a zombie with Blood Plague fucks you up as you become a carrier. Get hit enough times and a countdown begins. Each hit gets you closer to turning into an infected, and only a plague cure can save you. Much like the hostile survivors, these tweaks to zombies as a whole make the world so much more challenging and unpredictable, as you have to think carefully about where you need to loot without putting yourself in too much danger. Until you craft some pipe bombs, then you just spam the shit out of them. What's the big deal with zombies though, you might be saying? Can't you just run them over like you could in the first game? Yeah, good luck with that. The cars in number 2 are made of wet paper towels. Undead Labs made some massive but needed changes to the vehicles in this game. If you've played the first one, you know that cars were your best friend. They could take out hordes with ease, and there's so many to the point where you don't care if you break down or get one stuck, because there's always another one close by. Cars in State of Decay 2 are like a valuable resource. They need to be refueled with fuel cans and fixed with repair kits. Despite taking so much damage from squishy zombies, they never seem to take damage when falling from great heights or when rolling over. These little tweaks mean you have to take extra care when travelling around, as if you don't have fuel or repair kits, then you're buggered. Another great thing is that you can craft upgrade kits for your cars, making them look like something out of Mad Max. State of Decay is made up of 3 game modes: the campaign that I already mentioned, which delivers the most sandboxy style of gameplay and is my personal favourite of the 3, and the other 2 game modes seem to try and scratch a specific itch some State of Decay fans just couldn't get with the campaign mode. I never played the game at launch, but apparently according to some online sources, it was a bit shit. People weren't too happy with the state of the game, pardon the pun, and the Heartland DLC was added as a way to please the fans who enjoyed the narrative side of the first game. What is interesting with this game mode is that when you boot it up, you are met with a choice to pick between 2 different pairs of survivors with their own stories. I chose Larice and her aunt Fiona because this one lets you meet back up with the resident hillbilly moonshiners of Trumbull Valley. The other game mode, Daybreak, is pure horde-based gameplay. Players must defend a computer nerd as she hacks a big pole. The game starts off fairly easily, then all of a sudden loads of harder enemies come flying at you, which makes it a very chaotic and entertaining time killer. The soundtrack leans into what made the first game so good, but adds variation and a more modern sound. Many of the tracks give off a sense of adventure. Though things look bleak, the survivors aren't out of the fight yet, but it's going to take a lot of hard work for them to make a difference, and the other songs in the game sound really bleak. They heighten the tense and scary moments of the game, whilst at the same time make you feel like a badass as you fight back waves of zombies and freaks. There's something about State of Decay 2 that feels so much more unique than the first. The game has more flair and personality. Things like melee takedowns and special moves help spice up the once repetitive melee combat from the first game, and the world itself feels a lot more interactable and unpredictable, with things like bounties and murderous survivors. But another reason it stands out from the first is the multiplayer. Not having the first game be a co-op experience felt criminal back in the day, but luckily you can now join your friends on a zombie murdering frenzy. State of Decay 2 has so much more to offer, and I feel like people don't appreciate it enough. The game is miles better than the first, for me at least, and I can't wait to see what Undead Labs are cooking up for the third game. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they finally put Lily out of her misery.